At 2 a.m., the night before I buried my wife's mother, her phone lit up on the nightstand. I reached over to silence it so she could finally sleep. She'd cried herself raw an hour earlier. The funeral was in 9 hours. One message, a man's name I didn't know. I read it 3 times in the dark. He was worried about her. He asked if she'd told me yet. I set the phone back down, screen off, exactly where it had been. My wife slept beside me, trusting the dark the way she'd always trusted me. I didn't wake her. I didn't make a sound. At breakfast, I handed her coffee, 2 sugars the way she likes it. "Call him back," I said. He sounded worried. She went very still. She never saw the bag already packed by the door. I'm Declan. I'm 33 years old, and the woman I married had no idea the quietest man in her whole family had already read every word. So let me tell you how a 10-year marriage ends without a single raised voice. You have to understand one thing about me first, because it explains everything that comes after. I didn't grow up with a family, not a real one. I grew up in a system. A caseworker, a rotating cast of houses, a black garbage bag that held everything I owned the summer I turned 11. I learned young that people leave, and I learned the trick to not being left. Be useful, be quiet, be steady, be the kid nobody has to worry about, and maybe you get to stay a little longer. I got very good at it. I built a whole life out of being the person nobody ever had to worry about. So when I met Vanessa Whitfield at 20 and she brought me home to a house where the porch light stayed on for you, I thought I'd won something I wasn't supposed to have. Her mother, Constance, put a plate in front of me the first night and told me to eat before it got cold, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like there'd always been a place set for me and I'd just been running late for 20 years. I married Vanessa when I was 23. We've been married almost 10 years. We have a daughter, Poppy, who is 6, who has her mother's laugh and, I'm told, my stubborn jaw. I built us a life the only way I knew how. Steady, reliable, the husband who takes the trash out before you ask, who makes the coffee, who re-shingles the roof himself in August because a contractor costs money, and I am the reliable one. Hold on to that word, reliable. It's the word that quietly broke my heart for years before I ever understood why. Let me show you what reliable looked like so you understand what she threw away. Every morning for 10 years, I got up first. I made the coffee. 2 sugars for her, black for me, into the same 2 mugs. Hers was cream-colored with a chip on the handle she refused to throw out. I'd set hers by her side of the sink so it was waiting when she came down. 10 years, 3,000 mornings. I never once forgot the sugar. Every night, I did the last walk of the house. Check the stove, check the back door, stand in Poppy's doorway a second and listen to her breathe. I did it without thinking, the way you do the things that hold a life together. I was the load-bearing wall. Nobody notices the load-bearing wall. That's sort of the point of it. It only gets noticed the day it comes down. Let me give you one small picture of it, so it's not just a word. Last Thanksgiving, the final one Constance would ever have, though none of us said that out loud yet. I hosted. 12 people at my table. I'd been up since 5 with the turkey. Vanessa left at 11 to grab a pie from the good bakery across town, and she was gone almost 2 hours. 2 hours for a pie. I carved, I refilled, I kept Warren's water topped up and Constance's plate light the way the nausea needed, and when Vanessa finally swept back in, flushed and bright, and apologizing about the traffic, her mother's family lit up like she'd walked in carrying the sun. "There she is," Bridget said. "We were about to send a search party." And they all laughed. And someone took the pie, and nobody, not one person at that table, asked who had cooked the meal they were eating, because that answer was so obvious, it was invisible. Declan did. Declan always does. I didn't mind it that day. I want to be honest about that. I'd built my whole sense of worth on exactly that arrangement. I cook. I carry. I'm needed. Therefore, I get to stay. It never once occurred to me that grab a pie had taken 2 hours because the bakery was near the lake. It never occurred to me, because I had trained myself, from the age of 11, never to ask the question that might get me sent away from the table. Constance caught my eye across the room that afternoon. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, and then she looked at her daughter coming through the door 2 hours late, with her cheeks pink, and then she looked back at me, and her mouth got tight. I thought she was tired. I know now she was doing math. She'd already started keeping the same ledger I was refusing to read. Vanessa used to say I was the most dependable man she'd ever met. Early on, she said it like a woman who'd found treasure. Somewhere in the last few years, the tone changed. She started saying it the way you'd describe an appliance. Reliable, like the dishwasher. Runs quiet, never complains, you forget it's even in the room. I noticed the change. I filed it under tired, under busy, under 100 small excuses a man makes when he's terrified of the alternative. Because here's the thing about a boy who grew up with a garbage bag. He will explain away almost anything to keep a door from closing on him again. That instinct kept me alive as a kid. It nearly cost me my whole life as a man. Before I take you any further into this, if it's already sitting heavy in your chest, do me one small favor. Hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. It genuinely helps these stories find the people who need them tonight. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. I read them. It helps to know I'm not talking into the dark. Now, let me tell you how the ground started shifting under a house I thought I'd built on rock. It started, like most true things do, with something small. About a year ago, Vanessa began coming home late. Client dinners, she said. A big new commercial account downtown. Offices, a whole building's worth of interiors. The kind of job that could put her business on the map. I was proud of her. I told her so. I picked up more of the poppy nights so she could chase it. Then the phone went face down. She'd never done that in 9 years of marriage. Now it lived screenside to the table, and if it buzzed, she'd flip it to check and flip it back. A small quick motion, like a card player protecting a hand. Then she started showering at night. She'd never been a night shower person. Now she came in late and went straight to the bathroom, and I'd hear the water run, and she'd come to bed with wet hair smelling of our soap and nothing else. I noticed each of these things, and each time I performed a small private miracle of unnoticing. She's stressed. The account is huge. Her mother is sick. Don't be that man, Declan. Don't be the insecure husband who reads a woman's phone. I want you to understand, I wasn't a fool. Some quiet accountant in the back of my mind had already started keeping a ledger. I just refused to read the totals. One night in the fall, I came home late myself, wrung out, and the house was dark. Poppy was at Bridget's. That's Vanessa's younger sister, 40 minutes out. Vanessa's car wasn't in the drive. I sat on the stairs in the dark and waited. She came in at 11, laughing at something on her phone. When she saw me sitting there, her face did a thing I will never be able to unsee. For half a second before she rearranged it into surprise, she looked disappointed, not caught. Disappointed, the way you look when you'd been counting on the house being empty. "You scared me," she said. "Why are you sitting in the dark like a serial killer?" "Waiting for you." "You didn't have to." She kissed my cheek on her way past. She smelled like a restaurant, and underneath the restaurant, cologne. Not mine. God, what a night. Clients. Which client? The smallest pause, a hairline crack in a pane of glass. The Kessler people. They talk forever. She was already climbing the stairs. "Is Poppy staying at Bridges?" "Good. I'm dead. Night, babe." And she was gone up the stairs, and I sat there with the cologne still in the air, and I made a decision I would make again if I had to. Her mother was dying. I loved that woman like she was my own. And I was not going to detonate this family in the middle of Constance's last months on Earth. Whatever this was, and I was beginning to be very afraid of what this was, it could wait until after. So I stayed quiet. I stayed steady. I stayed the load-bearing wall. And upstairs, my wife fell asleep smelling like another man, absolutely certain that her husband would never do anything but forgive her. That certainty was the single biggest mistake she ever made in her life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the year that actually earned me the right to leave. The year I became a dying woman's son. Constance was diagnosed in October. Pancreatic cancer. If you know anything about that one, you know what the number of months meant when the doctor said it. 8, maybe. She got 8. For most of those 8 months, I was the one who drove her. Nobody decided it on purpose. It just rolled downhill the way everything rolls downhill to the reliable one. Vanessa had the business, the account, the calendar that somehow never had a free Tuesday morning. Bridget had the kids. Warren, Constance's husband, my father-in-law, could barely sit in a waiting room without his hands starting to shake. So I took the mornings. I'd tell the office I had a meeting, and I'd drive across town, and I'd pick Constance up, and I'd sit with her through the infusions. 4 hours some days in a beige recliner under a bag of poison that was supposed to save her life. She'd doze. I'd work off my laptop. When she woke up, she'd want to talk about anything on earth except cancer. Let me give you one of those mornings, because it's the one I go back to. It was maybe February. The chair next to her was empty. Vanessa had promised to come and then texted at the last minute, slammed, "So sorry. Kiss Mom for me." Constance watched me read the text on my phone, and she watched my face not react. And she said, "You're a bad liar, Declan. It's my favorite thing about you. You just did a whole speech with your face and didn't say a word." "She's swamped," I said. Constance looked at the IV in the back of her hand for a while. Then she said quietly, "You never talk about before. Before Vanessa. Where'd you come from, son?" Nobody in that family had ever really asked. Not once in 10 years. So I told her a little. The garbage bag, the houses, the way you learn to pack in 4 minutes flat and want almost nothing, because wanting things is how they hurt you when they take them. She was quiet a long time. Then she reached over, IV and all, and took my hand, and she said, "Well, you've got somewhere now." I believed her. God help me. I believed her all the way to the end. That was the last good year of my marriage, and I spent most of it in a chemo ward, holding the hand of the wrong woman's mother, and I would not trade 1 minute of it. Not one. There was one morning near the end I keep coming back to. She was very weak by then. She'd stopped pretending she wanted to talk about anything but the truth. She reached over and worked her wedding ring off her thin finger. It took her a while, and I didn't help, because I understood it was something she needed to do herself. And she pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it. "For Poppy," she said. "Not for Vanessa. For Poppy, you hold it until she's grown, and you give it to her yourself. And you tell her it came from a woman who knew how to spot a good person and how to spot a person who was fooling her and who learned the difference the hard way." She looked at me a long moment. "You'll know when it's time. You're the one who pays attention." I didn't understand the whole weight of it then. I do now. She was already sorting her family into the ones she trusted and the ones she didn't, and she was putting the most precious thing she owned into the hand of the man who wasn't even blood, because he was the one who showed up. I have that ring in a small box in my dresser. Some nights I take it out and just hold it, the way she held my hand in that beige chair, and I make the same promise back. But here's the thing I couldn't see yet, the thing that turns my stomach even now. Every morning I gave Constance, Vanessa was giving to someone else. I found that out later. I'll get there. For now, just hold this. While I sat in that beige chair being somebody's son for the first time in my life, my wife was 40 minutes across town, and she was not at any client dinner. If you've ever been the one who showed up while everyone else had a reason not to, I already know you're feeling this in your teeth. Stay with me. It turns. Constance died at 6:40 on a Tuesday morning. I was there. Vanessa was there. Warren held his wife's hand and told her it was okay to go now. She could rest. He'd be all right. Which was a lie, and she knew it. And she squeezed his fingers to forgive him for it. Bridget was out in the hallway on her phone, and I stood by the window because it felt wrong to take up room that belonged to blood. But right at the very end, Constance opened her eyes. She didn't look at her husband. She didn't look at her daughters. She looked past all of them, across the room, at me. She held my eyes for a second, maybe 2, and there was something in it, urgent, frightened, a message she couldn't get her mouth around anymore. Then the second passed, and so did she. Vanessa cried the way you're supposed to cry, loud, collapsing, the whole room organizing itself around her grief. And I did what I do. I made the calls. I called the funeral home. I called the relatives from the contact list on Constance's phone, one by one, and said the sentence 40 times. I picked Poppy up from school and knelt down on the blacktop and told my 6-year-old that Grandma was gone, and I held her while she cried into my collar and asked me questions I couldn't answer. I held it all together because that is the job, and I am very good at the job. It wasn't until that night that the ground opened up. Vanessa finally took something to sleep around 10, and near 11, Warren came to find me on the back porch. He's a big man, Warren, or he used to be. Grief had folded him down to half his size. He stood in the doorway holding a white envelope like it might bite him. "She gave me this," he said, "about 3 weeks ago, when she could still write. Made me swear." He cleared his throat twice. "It's for you. Just you. She was Declan. She was very clear about that part. Not Vanessa, not the girls. You. For me? Only you. He looked at me, exhausted and past questioning anything. I don't know what's in it. I don't want to know. I just promised her, so. He held it out. So there. I kept my promise. My name was on the front in her handwriting, shaky at the end, near the finish line, but still hers. Warren went inside, and I sat alone on the porch of the house where I'd finally been given a family, and I opened the last thing Constance would ever say to me on this earth. I'm not going to read you the whole letter. Some of it belongs only to me. But I'll tell you how it started. It started, my dear Declan, I'm writing this while I still can because I know things now that I can't carry out of this world with me. And there is exactly one person in this family I trust to hold them. That's you. It was always going to be you. And a few lines down, the ground gave way. I know what my daughter is doing. I've known for a while. I've watched her drop your little girl at Bridget's and then drive the other way. I know his name. I'm ashamed of her, Declan. And I'm more ashamed of myself. Because I said nothing. For months, I said nothing. Because I could not stand for it to be true. And because I was afraid that if I named it out loud, I'd lose her at the same time I was losing everything else. I read that paragraph standing up. Then I had to sit down on the top step. She knew. The dying woman I'd driven to 40 appointments had spent her last months carrying the weight of what her daughter was doing to me. And it had cost her more than the cancer did. I could see it now, all those mornings. The way she'd study my face and go quiet. She'd been trying to find the courage. She'd been trying to protect me and couldn't figure out how to do it without breaking her own child. There was more in that letter. There was a name. I'll get to the name. There were small, specific things a mother sees and a husband misses. And near the end, there was a line I have not been able to stop hearing from that night to this one. She wrote, You were the son I got right. Whatever you decide to do, you decide it for you and that little girl, and for no one else. And don't you dare let anybody in this family tell you that being steady made you a fool. It made you the best man at every table you ever sat at, including mine. I sat on that porch until the sky went the color of ash. Then I folded the letter into the inside pocket of my jacket, flat against my chest, and I made the decision that changed the rest of my life. I was not going to scream. I was not going to break anything or blast screenshots into the family group chat or humiliate a grieving woman across her mother's casket. That is not the man Constance saw when she looked at me, and by the end, I understood this now. She had done more to raise me in 1 year than anyone had done in 30. But I was done. Completely, permanently, quietly done. And I had 5 days until the funeral to become a man that family had never once seen. A man who was leaving. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before I go on. If you were holding that letter the night before you had to stand up at that funeral and hold an entire grieving family together, what would you have done first? Comment your gut answer. I think about mine every single day. The next morning, I did something I had not done once in 10 years of marriage. I lied to my wife. Not a cruel lie, a small, load-bearing one. She came down puffy-eyed and asked what Warren and I had talked about so long on the porch, and I said we'd gone over arrangements, the casket, the church versus the funeral home, what Constance would have wanted. Vanessa nodded and dabbed her eyes and reached for the coffee I'd already made her. You're so good at this, she said. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without you. 10 days earlier, that sentence would have warmed me straight through. That's the part that still turns my stomach. For 10 years, I don't know what I'd do without you was the closest thing to being loved that I let myself need. I had built my entire heart around being indispensable because a boy with a garbage bag learns that being needed is the only thing that keeps a door open. Now I heard it clean for what it actually was. Not love, logistics. I was the man who handled things. I was useful, and you don't cheat on someone you're afraid to lose. You cheat on someone you are absolutely certain will never leave. Her affair wasn't a verdict on me being unlovable. It was a verdict on me being unleavable. She'd bet her whole double life on the one thing everyone always bet on with me, that I would stay. That was my wound, laid bare on my own kitchen counter. Reliable, steady, indispensable, invisible. I drank my coffee. I said, go rest, I've got the calls. And I went to work, and I found Toby. Toby is my oldest friend, senior engineer, 2 offices down from mine. He's the man who pulled me out of a temp gig 11 years ago and never once, not one time, made me feel like the foster kid standing in the corner of the room. I stepped into his office and shut the door. "I need a lawyer," I said. "A good one. Family law. And I need it quiet." Toby set down his pen and looked at me for a long moment. He didn't ask a single stupid question. "Constance," he said finally, because he knew I'd been living at that hospital. "Constance knew," I said, and my voice did something then. It cracked clean down the middle on that one word, knew. The first time it had cracked in months. Toby got up and put a hand on my shoulder and just let it pass, the way real friends do. No fixing, just a hand. "I've got a guy," he said. "Elias, best I know. I'll call him tonight." He waited until I looked up. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm going to be." That was the first fully true thing I'd said out loud in a year. That night, I met the lawyer at a diner 2 towns over because I wasn't ready to be seen walking into a family law office in my own town. Elias was maybe 60, gray, careful. He ordered pie and listened for 20 minutes without writing anything. And the first real question he asked wasn't about the affair or the house. It was, "How old's your daughter?" "6. "Okay." He nodded slowly like that reordered everything. "Then let's talk about her first. And the rest is just math." I want to tell you the truth about that conversation, because this is where the story could have gone another way. Because Elias didn't hand me a clean, satisfying revenge. He handed me a warning. "You said you want to leave with your dignity and not turn her into a villain in front of the kid," he said. "That's the right instinct. It's also the hard road. Here's what you need to hear." He leaned in. "You move out. You're the one who left. On paper, in the neighborhood, in your daughter's little memory. You're the one who left the marriage right after Grandma died. She will tell that story, and she will tell it well. And there won't be a folder of evidence in the world that makes the average person unhear it. Affairs don't move a custody judge, Declan. Stability does. And right now, she's got the house, the school district, the extended family, and a very sympathetic dead mother." I sat with that. The waitress refilled my coffee. "So what do I do?" I said. "You don't run," he said. "You build, quietly. You document nothing dramatic and everything boring. You're the involved father. You always have been. And we make that a wall she can't get around. And you do not, under any circumstance, blow up at her in front of witnesses in a way that makes you look unstable. Grieving man loses it at his mother-in-law's funeral. That's her whole case, handed to her gift-wrapped." He pointed his fork at me. "Your calm is your best asset. It's the only thing in this that's worth more than her lies. Don't spend it. Don't spend your calm." I've thought about that line 1,000 times since. We started that night, the slow way, the right way. Toby drove me home from the diner because I wasn't fit to. We sat in his truck in my driveway for a while, engine ticking, both of us looking at the house. The porch light I'd installed, the gutters I'd cleaned, the roof I'd shingled in August. "You built that whole thing," Toby said. "Didn't you? Every board." "Pretty much. And she thinks you'll never leave it." He shook his head slowly. "Man doesn't leave the house he built. That's the bet. That's the bet." He was quiet a second. Then he said, "You know what the funny thing is? I've watched you for 11 years, Declan. You're the only guy I know who'd walk away from a house he built and not take a single thing but the kid. Anybody else would burn it down or fight for the granite countertops. You just want out clean." He looked at me. "That's not weakness, whatever they've got you believing in there. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen a man do." I didn't have an answer for that. My throat wasn't working right. "Spare room's yours," he said. "You and Poppy both. Air mattress is garbage, I'll be honest. But the door locks and there's cereal. You come whenever." "Toby, don't." He put the truck in reverse. "You've been the one who shows up for everybody for a decade. Let somebody show up for you for once. Go to bed." I went inside, and that was the first night in a long time I slept more than a couple of hours in the house I built, next to the woman who'd bet her whole life I'd never leave it. Because for the first time, I knew I had somewhere else to go. And back at my house, even that night, my wife was texting a man named Adrian, telling him she missed him, telling him her husband suspected absolutely nothing. She was half right. God, she was only ever half right about me. Over the next 3 days, I learned who Adrian was. And it was so much worse than a stranger. I'm not going to inflate the discovery into something cinematic, because the truth of it was smaller and colder than any movie. There was no dramatic reveal, no laptop left open at the exact incriminating moment. It was quiet, and it was patient, and it was mine. Adrian was her college boyfriend, the one from before me, the one whose name I'd heard maybe twice in 10 years, always in that light, dismissive tone people use for a person they very badly want you to believe doesn't matter. He'd come back into her life about 4 years ago, as a client, the commercial account, the offices downtown, the Kessler building, the very same Kessler people who talk forever. That was the job that had started keeping her late. That was the map of my last 4 years, and someone else had drawn it. 4 years. Let me make sure you feel the size of that number, because I didn't at first. The mind protects you from a number that big. 4 years is not a mistake. It's not a weak moment at a low point in a marriage. 4 years is a second life, running underneath the one I thought we were both living. It ran through 2 of Poppy's birthdays. It ran through her mother's diagnosis. It ran through every single morning I sat in that beige chair, doing the job Vanessa's own family wouldn't do. I found the photographs almost by accident, and I'll tell you exactly how, because it matters. 6 years ago, I'd set up her phone. New phone, I moved everything over, made the accounts, the cloud backup, the shared album, so Poppy's baby pictures synced to both our devices. She never learned any of it. She never changed a single password in her life, because that was my job. She trusted me to run the entire machinery of her existence, while she lived a completely different life on top of it. So the shared album that was supposed to hold Poppy's first steps also, quietly, held a weekend at a lake I had never been invited to, his arm around her waist, her laughing at the camera, wearing a thin gold bracelet I had never bought her and never seen on her wrist. I sat at my desk and looked at that photo for a long time. And here's the strange part. I wasn't even furious yet. Mostly I felt this vast, exhausted grief for the man in my own house who'd made her coffee that morning. 2 sugars. He seemed so far away from me, that man, so easy to fool. I wanted to reach back through the years and tell him something, and I didn't have the words. I did not screenshot it to wave in her face. Elias's voice was in my ear. Document the boring, not the dramatic. And Constance's letter was against my chest, and I understood in my bones that revenge and dignity cannot ride in the same car. One of them always ends up driving, but I let myself know it now. Completely, all the way to the bottom, no more unnoticing, ever again. That night, Bridget was at our house, helping with the service. She and Vanessa sat at my kitchen table with a bottle of wine, heads bent together, and I came in for a glass of water and caught the tail end of something. "Just get through the funeral," Bridget was saying, low. "After the funeral, you two can figure out whatever you're going to." She looked up and saw me in the doorway and stopped like she'd hit a wall. "Whatever you're going to what?" I said. Easy, filling my glass at the sink, my back half to them. "The seating," Bridget said, smooth as glass, "for the reception. It's a nightmare. Aunt Judy can't sit near the Petersons, you know how it is." She was a good liar. Better than her sister, honestly. Quicker, less tell. And in that 1 second, I understood something that landed harder than the photos had. Bridget knew too. The sister knew, which meant this whole grieving family, the one that had put a plate in front of me and told me I belonged, had been quietly managing me, handling me, keeping the reliable one calm and useful through the funeral, exactly the way I had spent my entire life being handled by people who needed me steady and didn't much care what it cost. I set my glass down. I smiled. I said the seating would sort itself out, and I went to check the stove and the back door and stand in Poppy's doorway and listen to her breathe. And inside, one more door swung quietly, permanently shut. And here's the thing about that moment. Standing in my own kitchen, holding a glass of water, while the two of them planned my life around me. Almost everyone assumes a man like me finally explodes here. That's the story people expect. The quiet one snaps. The wall comes down loud. But that's not what steady does. Steady doesn't get loud. Steady gets certain. Watch. But before I could build anything, there was a bath I have to tell you about. Because that's the night the grief grew a spine. It was 2 nights after the letter. I was giving Poppy her bath. My job, always my job. And she was doing the thing 6-year-olds do, narrating her entire life in no particular order. And right in the middle of it, apropos of nothing, pouring water from one cup to another, she said, "Adrian has a boat." I kept my hands moving in the water. I kept my voice exactly level. "Who's Adrian, Bug?" "Mommy's friend. We went on his boat. It went really, really fast." She frowned at her cup. "Mommy said don't tell Daddy because it's a surprise." The water was warm. I remember that detail with a strange precision. My daughter was looking up at me, wet-haired and trusting. And a boy who grew up where I grew up knows exactly how to keep his face still while the floor drops out from under it. "That sounds fun," I said. "When did you go on the boat?" She counted on her wet fingers, which meant nothing. She can't measure time yet. "When you were with Grandma at the doctor." "When I was with Grandma at the doctor." So it wasn't just a second life running alongside mine. She'd brought our daughter into it. On the mornings I sat in a beige chair being Constance's son, my wife had loaded our 6-year-old into a car, driven her to a lake to meet the man, and taught her to keep it a secret from me. Don't tell Daddy. She'd made it a game. She'd made my daughter a small accomplice to the thing that was quietly killing our family. That was the first time the grief cracked and something colder came up underneath it. Not rage. I never really got rage. It was more like the moment an engineer stops feeling sad about the building and sees, very clearly, the crack running through the load-bearing beam, and understands what has to happen now, no matter how much he loved the house. I finished the bath. I read her 2 books instead of 1. I sat in her doorway a long time after she fell asleep. And I understood this was no longer only about me and what I could or couldn't forgive. There was a small person in this house being taught that love and secrets are the same thing. And I was not going to let my daughter grow up learning that lesson from the inside of a lie. Constance's letter had told me to decide for me and that little girl. I finally understood she'd listed us in that order on purpose. You cannot protect a child from a burning house you refuse to admit is on fire. The next morning, before work, I drove downtown. I still don't fully know why. I parked across the street from the Kessler building, the account, the offices, the reason for 4 years of late nights, and I sat there with my coffee like a man casing his own life. At 20 to 9, her car pulled into the garage. I watched her walk in, and a few minutes later, on the sidewalk out front, there was Adrian, a coffee in each hand, 2 cups. He went in through the same door she had. I didn't need it. I already knew everything, but there's knowing and there's seeing. And watching his back go through that door with a coffee for my wife did something the photographs hadn't. It made him a man instead of a rumor. It made all of it ordinary and daily and real. This wasn't some passion that had swept them away. It was a routine. It was a Tuesday. It was as habitual as the 2 sugars I'd been stirring into her mug every morning for 10 years. He had his version of the 2 sugars. That was the part that finally sat down in my chest and stayed. I drove to work. I confronted no one. I called Elias from the parking lot and said, "She's taken my daughter into it. Boat, lake. Told her to keep it from me. Does that change the plan?" "It doesn't change the plan," he said. "It hardens it. And do one thing for me. Write down the boat. Tonight. The date. What Poppy said, word for word. Not to use it as a weapon on the kid. To remember you didn't imagine it. Because she's going to tell you that you imagined it, and you're going to want the proof for yourself." That was good advice. She did tell me I'd imagined it, later, more than once, in that soft, worried voice. And I had the boat, in my own handwriting, to hold on to on the nights she nearly convinced me the ground under my feet wasn't really there. The next 2 days, I built. I want you to see it, because this is the part the revenge stories skip. There was no montage. There was a man being a father in a house that had become a stage set. I took Poppy to school. I made her lunch. No crusts. The specific yogurt. The note in the box I'd been putting there since kindergarten. I signed her up for the summer swim program myself, on my own account. My name on the form, because Elias said the boring paperwork was the wall. I called my landlord friend from Toby about a 2-bedroom that might come open. I moved a little money into an account that was only mine. Not hidden, not stolen, just mine. The first thing in 10 years that was only mine. And I noticed how strange it felt to want something for myself. Bridget cornered me on the second day. I was in the garage loading folding chairs for the reception when she came out and pulled the door most of the way shut behind her. She leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, and studied me for a while. When she finally spoke, it wasn't the smooth kitchen voice. It was the real one, underneath. "How long have you known?" she said. So she wasn't going to pretend. Interesting. "Long enough," I said. I kept loading chairs. "Okay, then let's be adults about it." She'd shifted into negotiation, brisk and clean. "Mom just died. Vanessa is a wreck. Whatever happens between you two, it does not happen this week. Not at the funeral, not at the reception, not in front of this family. You owe us that much." "I owe you that. You owe Mom that." She played it like a card she'd been holding all along. "You loved her, right? All that driving, the son of the year routine? Then you don't turn her funeral into your divorce. You wait. You be the bigger man, like you always are." A thin smile. "It's sort of your whole thing, isn't it? Being the bigger man." There it was. Even here. Even now. The family reflex, smooth as a worn stare. Hand the reliable one the weight, then remind him that carrying it is who he is so he won't set it down. I stopped loading chairs. "You knew," I said. Not a question. "The whole time. You watched her drop Poppy at your house and drive the other way, and you covered for it. You sat across from me at Thanksgiving and passed me the potatoes, and you knew." Something flickered over her face. Not guilt, exactly. More the irritation of being made to look straight at a thing she'd worked hard to keep in her side vision. "I'm her sister," Bridget said. "What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to be someone I could trust," I said. "You all told me I was family. Turns out family was just the word for the guy who does the driving." She didn't have anything for that. She straightened up, smoothed her shirt, and put the kitchen voice back on like slipping into a coat. "Just get through the week, Declan. For all our sakes, don't do anything you can't take back." She went inside. I finished loading the chairs, and I thought, I have no intention of doing anything I can't take back. Everything I've done, I already took back. You just haven't noticed yet. Nobody ever notices the wall until the day it's gone. And I grieved Constance. That part wasn't strategy. I'd sit in my car in the school pickup line and feel the letter against my chest and just miss her. This woman who'd known me 1 year longer than the daughter she was ashamed of and had chosen me anyway. Meanwhile, Vanessa performed her grief and I performed my normalcy, and we passed each other in the kitchen like two actors in the same play who've stopped reading each other's scenes. Once she caught my arm. "You've been so quiet," she said. "Are you okay? You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" Look at that sentence. Look at the nerve of it. "You'd tell me if something was wrong." "I'm just tired," I said. "It's a hard week." "I know." She kissed me. "After all this is over, let's get away. Just us. Reconnect. I've missed you." "I've missed you," sent to me from the same phone in the same week. That was telling Adrian the same 3 words. "Yeah," I said. "After all this is over?" We were, at least, agreed on that much. After all this was over, everything would be different. We just meant different afters. That night, I couldn't sleep, which is how I came to be awake at 2 a.m. when Adrian's message lit up the nightstand. "You already know that scene." I silenced it so she could sleep. I read his words 3 times in the dark. He loved her. He was worried. He wanted to know if she'd told me yet. Told me what? For one honest moment, lying there in the dark, I let myself hope. Maybe they were about to do the decent thing. Maybe the funeral was the last obligation before she finally came clean and set us both free with the truth. But she never came clean. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not for one single second when the truth might have cost her something. Vanessa only ever confessed to things after they were already known. After there was nothing left to protect but the story. So I stopped waiting for her to be brave. Some things you have to do for yourself. I got up at 4 a.m., moving quietly, the way a boy learns to move who has packed a garbage bag in the dark before. I put a duffel together, not much. A man who grew up owning nothing doesn't need a lot to walk out of a house. I set the bag by the front door. Then I went to the kitchen and made coffee. When Vanessa came down at 7, hollowed out, she found me at the counter with 2 mugs already poured. I handed her the cream-colored one with the chipped handle. 2 sugars. "Call him back," I said. He sounded worried. I watched it hit her. I watched her decide in real time whether to run at it or away from it. And I watched her reach on instinct for the oldest tool in her kit. "Declan," Her voice trembled, and it was a good tremble, a real actor's tremble. My mother is being buried in 4 hours. Whatever you think you saw, whatever you think this is, please, please, I cannot do today, and this, not today, please. And there it was. The grief as a shield. Bury the truth under the casket, then dare me to dig at it on the worst day of her life. If I said one hard word now, I'd be the monster. Grieving man attacks his wife at her mother's funeral. Elias had warned me she had a dead mother for a weapon, and she'd found it before her coffee cooled. Here's what she could not understand standing there in my kitchen. I had no intention of digging today. I loved Constance far too much to turn her funeral into a referendum on her daughter's affair. I was going to stand at that grave and grieve the one person in this family who had ever chosen me, and I was going to be dignified about it, and I was going to let Vanessa have her mother's funeral in peace. And she was going to spend every single minute of it believing she had won. "Okay," I said, quiet. "Not today." Relief flooded her whole body. She thought not today meant not ever. She thought steady old Declan had blinked, the way the load-bearing wall always blinks, because what else does a wall do but hold? "Thank you," she breathed. She squeezed my hand. "Thank you. I love you." "Go get dressed," I said. "We can't be late." She went up the stairs, light on her feet. I stood in the kitchen and finished my coffee. And I did not move the bag by the door. If you have ever smiled at someone across a room while your entire life quietly ended behind your eyes, you already know exactly what that morning tasted like. And then, the day before the funeral, I almost lost the whole thing. Not to her affair, to her story. Toby called me on my lunch break. He was quiet in a way I didn't like. "I wasn't sure I should tell you this," he said, "but you need to hear it from me. My wife ran into Bridget at the pharmacy this morning, and Bridget was working the room, Declan, telling everybody how worried the family is about you, how you've checked out since Constance got sick, how Vanessa's been carrying everything alone and doesn't know how much more she can take." A pause. She used the word unstable. About you. I sat in my car with the phone against my ear and felt the floor I'd been so carefully building tilt sideways. They were writing the story first. Of course they were. While I was quietly, decently doing it the right way. No scenes, no screenshots. Protect the funeral, protect the kid. My wife and her sister were out seeding the neighborhood, the family, the whole watching world with the only version that would ever matter. The one where I was the cold, absent, unstable husband who fell apart and walked out on a grieving widow's little girl. And here is what put ice in my stomach. They were good at it. Better than me. I'd spent my entire life being invisible on purpose, and it turns out invisible men make excellent villains in other people's stories, because nobody knows you well enough to argue. Elias had warned me, affairs don't move a judge, stability does. And she had the house, the school district, the whole extended family, and a sympathetic dead mother. Now she had the narrative too. She could lose the marriage and still keep my daughter, because she was writing me as the man who left. That was the moment I nearly caved. I won't pretend I was steel the whole way through this. I sat in that parking lot and did the oldest arithmetic of my life. If I stay, if I swallow it, if I forgive her and never say a single word, then I'm not the man who left. I keep Poppy every night instead of every other week. I keep the porch light. I keep the story clean, even if the marriage underneath it is poison. Stay small, keep the door open, pay any price at all to not be the one who's left behind. That trade had kept me breathing since I was 11 years old. And there it was again, right on the table, dressed up this time as being a good father. I want to tell you, I saw through it instantly. I didn't. I sat in that lot for the better part of an hour and seriously considered burning Constance's letter and living inside a lie for the next 12 years. For my daughter, I told myself, because being left had terrified me for 33 years, and being cast as the leaver terrified me worse. That was the true low point, not the discovery. This. The moment the exit almost swung shut from the inside, in my own 2 hands. And what got me back on my feet wasn't rage. It was a question I could suddenly hear, plain as the beige recliner, in Constance's voice. What are you teaching her? If I stayed and swallowed it, Poppy would grow up in a house running on a lie, learning by osmosis that love means tolerating anything, that the steady parent is the one who disappears into keeping the peace. I would be protecting my custody by handing my own daughter the exact wound I'd spent my whole life bleeding from. I'd be making her a wall, too. No, if they wanted to write me as the man who left, then I would leave so cleanly, so calmly, so plainly without cruelty, that their story simply would not hold. I wouldn't fight the narrative with noise. I'd fight it with the truth, spoken out loud one time in front of the only witnesses who could ever matter, and then with 10,000 boring, documented, ordinary days of being exactly the father I had always been. I called Elias back. "She's telling people I'm unstable." I figured she might. He didn't sound worried, which steadied me more than anything he could have said. "So, here's the whole plan, Declan. You don't get unstable. Not once. Not for 1 second. Not even when she hands you every reason on a plate. You be the calmest man at that funeral. You let her be the one who can't hold it together in front of the witnesses. Stability isn't a thing you claim. It's a thing people watch you do. So, let them watch. Before the funeral, I need to take you into the worst night of the whole thing, because it wasn't the discovery and it wasn't the reckoning. It was the night in between, when I almost didn't do it at all. The night before the funeral, before the 2 a.m. text, earlier that same evening, the family had gathered at the house, and I watched Vanessa be, for a few hours, the woman I'd fallen in love with. Grief does that. It scrubs people down to something real. She sat on the floor with Poppy going through old photos of Constance, and she laughed and cried at the same time, and Poppy fell asleep in her lap. And Vanessa looked up at me over our daughter's head with an expression so open and so devastated that I felt the whole plan waver in my hands. And a voice in me, an old, frightened 11-year-old voice, said, "You could stay. You could burn the letter. She's broken right now. She'll come back to you. Families survive worse than this. You'd have a family. You'd get to keep the porch light. Are you really going to be the one who leaves? After everything you know about being left, are you really going to do that to Poppy? To yourself?" That was the low point, not the affair. This. The moment I almost chose the door, staying open over my own dignity, because that trait had kept me alive my whole life, and I did not know who I was without it. I went out to the back porch to breathe. Warren was there, in the dark, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Then he said, out of nowhere, "You know what she said to me? Near the end, your mother-in-law." He didn't look at me. She said, "Take care of Declan, he's the one who won't ask." He didn't know what he was doing to me. He didn't know about the letter yet, didn't know what he was confirming. He was just an old man passing along his dead wife's words in the dark. He's the one who won't ask. And I understood that Constance had seen the whole thing, not just the affair, but me. The wall that never asked to be noticed. The boy who'd rather hold the whole house up alone than admit it's crushing him. I put my hand flat against the letter in my jacket, and the 11-year-old voice went quiet. And I knew. I wasn't leaving because I'd stopped being able to forgive. I could have forgiven her. That was never the problem, and that's what people miss. I was leaving because Constance had asked me to want something for myself, one time before I died, and this was it. This was the something. Poppy was not going to grow up watching her father accept a life where he was tolerated. She was going to grow up watching him choose himself, cleanly, without cruelty, and she was going to learn from that what love is actually supposed to cost. That was the night the wall decided to stop being a wall and start being a man. And nobody in that house heard a thing. The funeral was the next day. The church held about 80 people. Constance had been the kind of woman who collected people the way other people collect grievances. The neighbors she'd driven to appointments for a decade, the widow from her book club, the young couple whose wedding she'd quietly helped pay for when both their families refused. They all came, and every last one of them had a story. And in every single story, Constance was the one who showed up. I sat in the front pew between Vanessa and Poppy. Vanessa held my arm the entire service, and to all 80 people, we were the picture of a strong marriage, weathering a terrible loss. I felt Bridget's eyes on us from 2 seats down, checking the seams of the thing she was helping hold together. I held Poppy on my lap. She kept whispering the same question, "When is Grandma coming back?" And I kept giving her the only true answer I had, which was that Grandma loved her so much, and that love doesn't go anywhere, even when the person does. I don't know if that helped her. It helped me. Then the priest asked if anyone wanted to speak. Vanessa had prepared remarks. She stood at the front, luminous in her grief, and she spoke about her mother's strength, her Sunday sauce, her laugh that filled a room. It was genuinely lovely. It was also, I slowly realized, entirely about how completely Constance had loved her. Not one word about who Constance actually was when no one was performing for anyone. I felt the letter against my chest. I felt that last look past me across the hospital room one more time. And I did something I had not planned to do. I stood up. I carried Poppy to the front with me. I hadn't written anything down. You don't need notes to talk about someone you loved. Most of you knew Constance a lot longer than I did, I said. I only got 20 years. I wasn't born into this family. I showed up late, and I showed up rough. And the very first thing this woman ever did was put a plate down in front of me and tell me to eat it before it got cold. A ripple of wet laughter went through the pews. That was so exactly her. I didn't grow up with much of a mother, I said. Constance never once made me feel that. Not one time in 20 years. And this past year, I got the honor of driving her to her treatments. I steadied my voice and made it hold. People kept telling me how generous that was of me. It wasn't generous. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because for 4 hours twice a week, in a room that smelled like antiseptic, I got to be somebody's son. The church had gone very still. Vanessa was crying. Warren had his whole face in his hands. She told me once that I had somewhere now. I said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worth what she saw in me. That's the whole eulogy. She looked at a man who had nothing and no one, and she decided he was worth a place at her table. If you ever get the chance to do that for a person, do it. It's the closest thing to God I've ever seen up close. I sat back down. Poppy patted my cheek with her small, warm hand, and I watched Vanessa look at me with shining, grateful, streaming eyes, and I understood that she thought that eulogy was about our family, about her, about us. It wasn't. It was a goodbye. I was telling the one person in that building who had earned it that I'd received her message, that I'd gotten it, that I was going to be worth it, and that being worth it meant I was leaving her daughter. Vanessa heard a love song. I was singing the sound of a door clicking shut. That was the last kindness I ever did her under one roof, letting her believe I was still hers, all the way through the last shovel of dirt on her mother's grave. The reception was at the house, our house, the one with the roof I'd shingled myself, up there in the August heat 2 summers back, because a contractor cost money, and I was the reliable one. By 4 o'clock, there were maybe 50 people packed into it. Vanessa moved through them like a hostess, gracious and grieving, accepting condolences and refilling glasses. Bridget ran the kitchen. Warren sat in the corner armchair receiving people one at a time, and I brought him a plate he didn't touch. And he caught my wrist for a second and just held it, and neither of us said anything. For the first hour, I did what I do. I worked the room. I took coats and refilled glasses and steered Aunt Judy away from the Petersons per Bridget's seating gospel. I carried Poppy on my hip when she got overwhelmed by all the sad grown-ups, and she pressed her face into my neck, and I felt her small heartbeat going fast, and I thought, whatever else happens in this house today, that heartbeat is the whole reason for all of it. I brought Warren his untouched plate, and he caught my wrist and just held it a second, and something in his grip told me he'd started to understand more than he'd said on the porch. I didn't push it. You don't rush a man toward the thing that's going to break him. You let him arrive. And underneath all of it, I was calm. Not numb. Calm. Elias's voice was steady in me. Stability isn't a claim. It's a thing people watch you do. So I let them watch a man carry his daughter and feed his father-in-law and grieve the woman in the photographs on the mantle. And every person in that room, without knowing it, was becoming a witness to who I actually was. I wasn't gathering evidence. I was just being, out loud, in front of everyone, the exact opposite of the man Bridget had been describing at the pharmacy. I felt the letter against my chest. I waited. I didn't know yet what would light the fuse. I only knew I wouldn't be the one to light it. Then the front door opened. I was standing at the window with Toby. Of course he came. He'd been at the church in the back, my one guest in a room full of hers, when a man walked in. A man half the room seemed to know. A man I had only ever seen in one photograph, on a lake I'd never been invited to. Adrian. He'd come to the funeral reception. He'd been worried about her, and he could not stay away, not even today, not even here, in the house where her husband and her child lived. I watched him scan the room for Vanessa. I watched him not see me, because Adrian had never once had to learn my face. To him, I was a piece of furniture in a house he intended to inherit. And across the room, I watched Bridget spot him and go absolutely white. Toby followed my eyes. "Who's that?" "That," I said quietly, "is the big commercial account." Now, I want to be very clear about what happened next, because it is not what people expect, and it is the whole reason I'm telling you this. I did not cross that room and hit him. I did not stand on a chair and announce anything. I didn't have to, and Elias's warning was steady in my ear. Your calm is worth more than her lies. Do not spend it. I had spent my entire life reading rooms. Who was safe? Who was leaving? Who was lying to whom? And I knew, watching this one, that all I had to do was hold still and let it play itself out. The truth had its own gravity now. I'd stopped being the only one holding it. Bridget got to him first. She grabbed his elbow, hissing, steering him back toward the door. Too late. Vanessa had already seen him. And Vanessa, running on 2 days without sleep and a lifetime of getting away with things, made the one mistake she couldn't manage her way out of. She crossed the room to him, in front of everyone, and her hand went to his chest. It was a small gesture, automatic, intimate. The gesture of a woman touching someone she touches all the time, a hand that knows exactly where it's going. And she said low, but in a suddenly quiet room, not nearly low enough. "You can't be here. Not here. He's right." She turned to find me, to locate the threat, to find the wall and make sure it was still holding. And she found me already looking at her from across our living room, with her mother's letter against my heart, and absolutely nothing left in my face for her to read. The room had gone silent in the way a room goes silent when something is wrong and nobody has named it yet. 50 people. Warren watching from his chair. Toby a half step back. A dozen of Constance's friends holding their little plates of ham and casserole, waiting. "Declan," Vanessa said, bright, fast, recovering. "This is Adrian. He did the Kessler building. He came to pay his—" "I know who he is," I said. I didn't say it loud. I have never once had to say a true thing loud. It landed in that silent room like a stone dropped into a deep well, and everyone heard it hit bottom. Adrian, to his credit, or his cowardice, said nothing at all. Bridget said, "Okay, this really isn't the time, or the—" "You're right," I said, turning to her. "It isn't the time. It's her mother's funeral. So here is what's going to happen. Adrian is going to leave. And tomorrow, when everyone's gone home, Vanessa and I are going to sit down and talk about the last 4 years. 4 years. I watched the number go through the room like a current. I watched Constance's friends do the arithmetic against their own memories. The late nights, the excuses, the account downtown. I watched Warren's face change as something he'd half known for months slid all the way into focus and locked. Vanessa's shield came up right on cue. Of course it did. It was the only move she'd ever needed. "You're doing this today?" Her voice climbed and cracked, beautifully, and she turned to the room, to her jury. "At my mother's funeral? In front of everyone? What is wrong with you?" She pressed a hand to her chest. "Everyone, I am so sorry. He's not himself. He's grieving. He doesn't know what he's saying." Wave 1, right on schedule. The lie, then the pivot. Make the truth teller the crazy one. I'd known it was coming. I said nothing. Elias was right. I didn't need to spend a word because the room had 2 days of funeral behind it, and a dead woman's grief in it, and it was about to turn without any help from me. Vanessa, it was Warren, from the corner, low and rough, and enough to turn every head in the room. He stood up slowly, an old man getting to his feet against the weight of everything. 3 weeks before your mother died, he said, she gave me a letter. For Declan, only for Declan. She made me promise on her life to put it in no other hand. His voice was shaking now, but he did not stop. I didn't understand why. I thought maybe it was money, or the house, or some old people business. I do understand now. I've been sitting in that chair for an hour understanding it. Dad, Vanessa started. You let that boy. Warren's voice broke fully, and he pushed through the brake. You let Declan drive your mother to every single treatment, every one, while you were with him. He didn't point at Adrian. He didn't have to. Your mother knew, Vanessa. She knew where you were going. She spent her last months on this earth, ashamed of her own daughter, and she couldn't tell me because she didn't want to die with me hating you, so she carried it alone. She carried it for you. The room did not breathe. 50 people, and I don't think one of them was breathing. That was wave 2, and I hadn't lifted a finger for it. A dying woman's shame spoken by her widower, corroborating everything without a single screenshot or receipt. You cannot spin a father standing at his own wife's wake. There is no performance that survives that. For a second, nobody moved. Then Bridget did the thing that finished it, though she was certain she was saving it. "Dad, stop!" She stepped in front of her father, turning to the room with her hands up. "Everyone, he's grieving. He doesn't know what he's saying. He's putting together things that aren't. Mom was sick. She was on a lot of medication. She got confused about—" "Bridget." The voice came from over by the kitchen. An older woman set down her plate and stood, small, silver-haired, completely steady. Rosalind, Constance's friend of 30 years, book club, Sunday phone calls, the person in that room who had known her longest of anyone but Warren. "Your mother was not confused," Rosalind said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Your mother sat at my kitchen table in March and cried until she couldn't get a breath because she'd worked out where Vanessa was going on Declan's chemo mornings, and she could not figure out how to live with it. She made me swear not to say a word while she was alive. She said it would kill Warren to hear it." A beat. "Well, she isn't alive anymore, and I am not going to stand here and keep her secret while you call your grieving father a liar over a plate of ham." The room made a sound then. Not a gasp. Something lower. The noise 50 people make together when a thing they'd all been politely not looking at becomes impossible not to see. That was the third wave, and I hadn't lifted a finger to bring it either. I'd stopped being the only one carrying the truth days ago out on that porch. Now it had a mother's shame, a father's grief, and a 30-year friendship all leaning the same direction, and there is no performance on this earth that stays standing under that kind of weight. But Bridget could not stop managing. That was always going to be her undoing. She rounded on Rosalind. And this was the part where the person who runs everyone says the one sentence too many. "You have no idea what this family has been. I know your sister took a 6-year-old out on that man's boat," Rosalind said, "and taught her to hide it from her own father. Constance told me that too. That's the piece that broke her, Bridget. Not the affair, the child." And there it was, out loud, in the middle of my living room, where 50 people could hear it. The boat. Poppy's small voice in the bathwater. "Don't tell Daddy." Now standing up in the center of the room with the lights on. I looked at Vanessa. She'd gone very still. The kind of still you go when the thing you were absolutely certain no one could ever prove is suddenly being described in order by 3 separate people who loved your dead mother more than they have ever feared you. Bridget sat down. She was finished. She'd walked into that room to defend her sister and instead confirmed every word, because people who are used to controlling the story cannot let go of it even when letting go is the only thing left that might save them. She hanged herself on her own reflexes. Elias had told me the guilty do that, given enough rope. I just hadn't expected the sister to reach for it first. But Vanessa tried. God love her. She tried because trying was all she'd ever had to do. She turned to me, and for 1 second the whole performance dropped, and I saw underneath it the thing I'd married, and the thing I'd feared, and the thing I finally, cleanly, completely no longer wanted. "You wouldn't dare," she said very quietly, "just for me now. Not today. Not to me. Not after everything I'm not doing anything today," I said. "I told you that this morning, in the kitchen, and I meant it. I let you bury your mother in peace. I stood up in that church, and I meant every single word I said." I paused. "I just wasn't talking to you when I said it." And I watched it finally reach her. The eulogy. The letter. The bag she'd walked past a dozen times this week without ever once seeing, because you don't see the wall until it's gone. "Where's your bag going, Declan?" she whispered. It wasn't even a question anymore. "Somewhere," I said. "I have somewhere now. Your mother made sure of that." Adrian left. Nobody stopped him, and nobody said goodbye, and the door closed behind him with a small, ordinary final click. The least dramatic sound in the world for the end of 4 years. Bridget went to her sister, who had sat down hard on the bottom stair, all the fight going out of her at once, because there was no longer anyone left in the room to perform for. The jury had already filed out. One of Constance's book club friends, a woman named Rosalind who'd known her for 30 years, walked over to me on her way to the door, and she took both my hands in her cold ones, and she said, "She talked about you all the time, honey. All the time. You were her boy." Then she left. Several others did the same on their way out. They touched my shoulder, not hers. I want to be honest with you, because you've come this far, and you deserve the truth and not the movie version. I did not feel triumphant, standing in the wreckage of the only house I had ever loved, holding my daughter's hand while her mother wept on the stairs. I felt no triumph at all. I felt grief the size of a building. But under the grief, for the first time in my whole life, I felt something I didn't have a name for as a boy, and can name now. I felt like I was worth the price of leaving. And that turned out to be the only thing I'd ever actually needed. The last of the guests found their coats. Vanessa stayed on the stairs, Bridget beside her, the two of them small now in a house that had gone quiet. Nobody was performing anymore, and without an audience, there wasn't much left of the thing they'd built. I went to the front door. The duffel bag was still sitting there, exactly where I'd set it at 4 that morning. The one bag she'd walked past a dozen times all week and never once seen. I picked it up. It didn't weigh much. A man who grew up owning nothing never does need a lot to walk out of a house. Then I went and found Poppy, who was sitting under the dining table with her shoes off, waiting out the sadness, the way little kids do. I crouched down. "Hey, Bug," I said, "you want to come stay somewhere fun with me and Uncle Toby tonight? There's cereal." She looked at me with Constance's eyes. She has her grandmother's eyes. I'd never let myself notice it until that second. And she said, "Is Mommy coming?" "Not tonight," I said, "but you'll see her real soon. I promise. Nobody's disappearing. We're just going somewhere quiet." She took my hand. She trusted me completely, the way she always has, the way her mother once did and traded away for a boat. And I picked up the bag in one hand and my daughter's hand in the other, and I walked out the front door of the house I'd built with my own 2 hands, and I did not look back at the stairs, and I did not slam a single thing. The porch light was on. I'd installed it myself years ago so the people I loved would always have a light to come home to. I left it on for them. That was the last gift I gave that house. Then I buckled my daughter into her seat, and I drove us towards somewhere quiet. And for the first time in 33 years, leaving didn't feel like losing. It felt like the first true thing I'd ever chosen. If this story found you tonight, if you're the steady one, the reliable one, the person everyone counts on, and somehow no one ever quite chooses, I need you to hear the one thing it took me 33 years and a dying woman's letter to finally learn. Being the person who stays is not the same thing as being a fool. And your calm is not weakness. It is the strongest thing in the room. Say that to yourself tonight, out loud if you have to. I moved out that night. Poppy came with me for the first week. Toby's spare room, an air mattress, a nightlight we bought at a gas station at 9 at night because I hadn't planned that part and she was scared of the new dark. Vanessa didn't fight it in the moment. She was too stunned, the wall was gone, and she was still learning how a house stands without one. The fight came later, through the lawyers, the slow, tired way Elias had promised it would, and it was long, and it was ugly in the small paper ways these things get ugly, and it was nothing at all like the movies. But I'll tell you how it landed, because that's the only part that ever mattered. We share custody now. 50-50. I never tried to take Poppy from her mother, and I have never once told my daughter a single ugly thing about the woman who bore her. She'll learn the shape of it herself someday, the way children always do, in her own time. And when she does, she is also going to know, because she was there, because she watched, that her father never used her as a weapon, not for 1 second, not even when using her would have won. That was the whole game to me, not the house, not being right. That. Vanessa and Adrian didn't last a year. It turns out an affair is a very different animal when it has to become a life, out in the daylight, with a custody calendar and a mortgage and no reliable husband at home, quietly running the machinery underneath it. I heard, through Warren, that Adrian left when it got hard, the way that kind of man always does. She had traded a man who showed up for a man who was only ever interesting in the dark. I don't say that to gloat. I say it because I finally understood the math she never did. The exciting one and the dependable one are almost never the same man, and only one of them is still there at 2 a.m. when your mother is dying. Warren and I still talk. He calls every Sunday. He lost his wife and, in some strange accounting only grief understands, kept a son. The spring after the funeral, we stood together at Constance's headstone, and he said, "She was right about you. She was right about all of it. That's all. We're not big talkers, Warren and me. We've never needed to be." Vanessa tried to come back, about 8 months on. I'll tell you about it because it was the last thing this whole story taught me, and it surprised me. She asked to meet for coffee, neutral ground, a place near Poppy's school. She'd lost weight. She looked tired in a way that wasn't a performance. The business had struggled without the steady income and the steady man quietly holding it up from underneath. Adrian was long gone, and the grief for her mother had finally caught up with her now that there was no drama left to outrun. For a moment, I felt something almost tender. 10 years is 10 years. You don't scrub a person out of yourself in 8 months, and I wouldn't trust anyone who says otherwise. "I made a mistake," she said. "The worst mistake of my life. I know that now. I threw away the best man I'm ever going to." She reached across the table for my hand. The old move, the one that had always worked. Poppy needs both of us together. People do this. They rebuild, and you're the most forgiving man I've ever known, Declan. It's who you are. And there it was. One last time. The bet. The lifelong certainty that I would stay, that I would forgive, that being reliable was the same as being endlessly available, that the door on my side of the table would always be open because it always had been. I didn't take her hand. I didn't make a speech. I just told her the truest thing I had. "You're right that forgiving is who I am," I said. "I did forgive you, months ago, actually. It was the only way I got any peace at all." I looked at her. "But forgiving you was never the same thing as coming back to you. That's the piece you never understood about me. In 10 whole years, you thought my kindness meant I'd take anything. It doesn't. It just means I won't be cruel about the leaving." She started to cry then. Real this time, I think. "I'm not the wall anymore, Vanessa," I said. I stood up. I left money on the table for both coffees because I'm still me. I'm just a man, and a man gets to choose where he's loved. I drove Poppy to swim practice that afternoon. The program I'd signed her up for myself, my name on the form, back when the boring paperwork was a wall I was building without even knowing I'd need it. She's fearless in the water now. She wasn't at first. That first day at the edge of the pool, she'd grab my hand. "What if I sink?" she said. "You won't," I told her. "And even if you do, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be right here." That's the whole difference, if you ever want to know it. Some people tell you that they love you, and some people are just there, at the edge of the water, every single time, on purpose for years, and never once ask you to keep it a secret. I kept the letter. It lives in a drawer now, not against my chest, because I don't need it over my heart anymore to remember what it says. But some nights, I take it out and read the last line, the one I told you I couldn't stop hearing. "You were the son I got right." I spent 33 years believing family was something you had to be lucky enough to be born into, and that I'd simply missed my one chance at it in a delivery room I don't remember. I took a dying woman to teach me the truth, and here it is, the only thing I know for sure. Family is not the people who happen to share your name. Family is the people who look straight at you when you have nothing, no money, no history, no reason to be given a thing, and decide on purpose that you're worth a place at the table. I have somewhere now. I have a small 2-bedroom with a window Poppy chose the curtains for. I have a Sunday phone call from an old man who calls me son. And I have a daughter who is learning, by watching me every other week, that steady is not the same as weak, that the man who stays and pays attention is not the fool in the story. He's the spine of it. Poppy asked me last week why I always make her chocolate milk with exactly the right amount of syrup every single time without her ever having to ask. "Because I pay attention," I told her. "That's what love actually is, kid. It's just paying attention to somebody for a long time on purpose." She thought about that for a while, stirring her milk. Then she looked up and said, "Grandma paid attention to you." "Yeah," I said. "She did. She was the first one who ever really did." And, for the first time in my whole life, Being the man who pays attention didn't feel like a wound I'd been carrying since I was 11. It just felt like the best thing about me.